My name is Antonio Gaudi Cornet. I was born on the 25th of June, 1852, in Mas de la Calderera, in a country home halfway between Reus and Riudoms, in the region of Camp, province of Tarragona. During my teens, I was a somewhat inconsistent student, and on more than one occasion, I perplexed my teachers, who didn't know if they were dealing with a genius or with someone who was crazy. Back then, artistic trends were reverting to medieval creations, particularly to the Gothic style. One of the leading art critics, the Englishman John Ruskin, wrote, "Ornament is the origin of architecture." Years later, this idea was to become a part of me. I always had a deep sense of being Catalan, and I felt closely attached to my homeland and to my people in a natural and absolutely emotional way. Following the instructions of the French master Viollet-le-Duc, I never sought a pure style. Rather, I studied the great works from the past in order to enrich the present with new knowledge. We must take the past as our base in order to build a work of value, but avoiding its mistakes. True originality means returning to the origin. My combination of styles and my personal way of working failed to arouse much enthusiasm among institutions, but I never lacked patrons who praised and promoted my work. A good example was Count Eusebi Gueli Basigalupi, a rich textile industrialist who had a restless, artistic spirit, and he commissioned my major projects. Count Gueli was a great man, with a princely spirit similar to that of the Florentine Medicis or the Genoese Doria. On one occasion, a group of people interested in my work visited my atelier. "You want to know," I asked, "where I find my ideal?" A standing tree spreads out its branches, which in turn have twigs, which in turn have leaves. Each isolated part grows in sublime harmony since the time of its creation by God the artist. As extravagant as some of my buildings may seem, I have always had a preference for common materials, such as stone or brick, and I have turned my gaze, time and again, to the great artisan traditions of my land: ceramics and wrought iron. In contrast to other architects of my time, I tried to be a pragmatist above all else. Rather than work from my drawing board, I preferred to be present at the construction site, designing in situ, reformulating ideas, experimenting, even arguing with the workers. I led those working with me to utter exhaustion, always seeking to improve things. But I did not deem my work as good until I was convinced that I could not perfect it any further. Everyone makes mistakes, but the one who makes fewer mistakes is the one who repeats things systematically. Throughout my life, I often dreamed about a different kind of house, where angles disappear, where the materials appear grandiose in their astral curves, where the sun shines on all four sides, creating an image of paradise. For me, architecture is the foremost visual art. Sculpture and painting need it. All their excellencies come from light. Architecture is the ordering of light. In 1878, when the brick and tile manufacturer Manuel Vicens commissioned me to build him a summer home, I had just obtained my architect's license. And when 5 years later I finally started the project, raising up a house was something completely new for me. One of my goals was to make the walls using humble materials. Ochre-colored natural stone as the base element combined with bricks. The contrast between these materials would cause the brick to stand out like ornamental stone. I sought a decorative effect by placing numerous multicolored tiles arranged like a chessboard. It was necessary to combine the protruding elements with the recessed elements, causing every element positioned in full light to have an opposite one in the shadows. When I went to measure the site, I discovered that it was completely covered in little yellow flowers. And so I adopted them as the ornamental theme for the tiles. I also found a lush palm tree, whose leaves became the inspiration for the wrought iron on the gate. During the construction process, one of the workers voiced his fear that one of the towers might possibly sink. I answered him saying, "You only see the bricks that are on the outside, but you must remember the armor on the inside." Throughout the house, I combined a variety of decorative styles ranging from Arabic art to more modern creations, including some Baroque elements, such as the false cupola in one room where, through the use of paint, I tried to make the birds seem as if they were really taking off and flying. Even though it was a work marked by my youth, I tried to give the house of Mr. Vicens its own distinguishing hallmark. By playing and combining Spanish tradition with Oriental reminiscences, I created a dwelling that, according to what some people say, could well belong to the story of 1001 Nights. When the octogenarian Eusebi Güell made me his preferred architect, I was still young and did not have many projects to my name. Güell had seen some of my work at the Universal Exposition in Paris and was attracted by my talent, my national origin, and my social concerns. I saw in him a mixture of nobility, financial ability, and social commitment. Don Eusebi had purchased an estate on the outskirts of Barcelona, between Les Corts de Sarrià and Pedralbes, on which a number of buildings needed to be reconstructed. Following his wishes, I concentrated all my attention on the main entrance. For the gateway, I designed a single piece 5 meters wide in 2 horizontal halves. The lower half would incorporate an abstract decoration based on square metal plates. The upper half would show the figure of a ferocious dragon standing guard over the gardens. My inspiration for this section came from the mythological animal that protected the garden of the Hesperides. At the same time that work was going on at the Pedralbes site, Eusebi Güell commissioned me to build a palatial house in the center of Barcelona. The land site was particularly unfavorable. The palace was to be built on Conde de la Salto Street, on an 18 by 22 meter lot, small even for a city palace. Given the dimensions and characteristics of the main facade, I decided to renounce almost entirely any sculptural ornamentation, except on the column that would bear the emblem of Catalonia. I made 8 initial designs that, with their respective variants, amounted to 25 drawings with different solutions. The 2 iron gates were a novelty and caused quite a stir throughout the city. The initials of the lord of the house can be seen in their upper portion. These huge gates were designed to give way to the carriages of the guests. I wanted to offer the observer the sensation of being in front of a huge palace. I therefore gave no consideration to anything of reasonable proportions, whether the oversized entrance gates or the numerous columns inside of all shapes and sizes. The large dome that crowns the main hall and that is perforated by numerous circular holes looked like a firmament dotted with stars and served as the ceiling for those high society gatherings Mr. Gaudi so enjoyed holding in this palace. As for the roof, I had always thought that it should be a key element in a house. A space that would allow me to unleash all my fantasy with unhindered freedom. And that's what I did. In order to disguise the chimneys and the ventilation openings, I imagined and created a small forest of ceramic towers, presided over by the crown of the dome of the large central hall. I don't believe that anything in the world has actually been invented. The fortune of an invention consists in seeing what God has placed in front of everyone's eyes. During the construction of this palace, and without my being aware of it, my name started to appear in newspapers around Spain and the Americas. It seemed that I was starting to become famous. I never imagined that one day my taste and style would be subordinated to the spirituality of my client. Of course, at that time, I was 36 years old and had a rather anti-clerical attitude, in keeping with the trend of the period. I believe that by commissioning me with the construction of the central school of the Company of St. Teresa of Avila, and by accepting certain economic conditions that in principle didn't seem overly promising, a change was taking place in my attitude with regard to a religious faith and the church. From the very outset, my work was plagued by financial problems. When the founder of the order, Enrique Dosso y Cervelló, reproached me for the increase in the cost of bricks, I had to insist, possibly not very wisely, "Each one to his own, Father Enrique. I'll stick to building houses, and you to saying Mass and praying." In general, I believe that I was able to comply as much as possible to the criteria of austerity that the order imposed on me. And to make matters worse, the main house was already up to the first floor when I accepted the commission, thus forcing me to work on someone else's project, which conditioned some of my solutions. The only stylistic element that defines the building is the parabolic arch that gives the appearance of a pointed silhouette. The materials employed were simple and inexpensive, fundamentally stone and brick. In spite of Father Rousseau, I allowed myself certain luxuries, like the castellated brick ridge crowning the facade. Halfway through the construction project of the School of the Society of St. Teresa, I became embroiled in another project that was to be much more decisive in my career and in my own life, the Sagrada Familia, or Holy Family Church. But I'll tell you more about that later. In 1898, I started designing a considerably large house on the street of Caspe in Barcelona. This house, a commission by the heir of Mr. Pere Martí Calvet, needed to satisfy a number of functions. The basement and the ground floor would serve as a warehouse and store, while the upper floors would incorporate 8 dwellings. In general lines, I designed a house that was quite conventional from the point of view of its structure, and, curiously enough, I received an honorific mention from the city for it, the only official recognition I received in my lifetime. In spite of its conventional design, I couldn't keep from incorporating a few details from my own natural fantasy, such as the effigies of the 3 saints that peer down onto the street from the facade, or even the height of the building itself, much greater than the maximum allowed. This tenant's building on Caspe Street is closely related to the Catalan Baroque style, with its atmosphere, its materials, and with its spirit. The balconies with their concave railings made of iron give a general bulging feeling that seemed interesting to me at the time. By the way, for Casa Calvet, on the first floor, I designed some mycological motifs that sought to honor my client, a great connoisseur and collector of mushrooms. Although the interior decoration was not as striking as some other of my creations, the interior patios proved to be an innovation for that time period. In 1890, my friend Eusebi Güell founded a textile factory in the little town of Santa Coloma de Cervelló, a few kilometers south of Barcelona, and alongside it he had a housing estate for the workers built. My commission was to build a church for the estate, and this gave origin to a series of drawings and plans that, in addition to serving as inspiration to me for the Holy Family Church, materialized into the crypt of this church, which, by the way, was never built. The construction of the crypt lasted more than 10 years, and throughout that time I let myself be captivated and inspired by the natural surroundings. Some basic elements in my architecture, such as the parabolic arch or the inclined pillars, took shape and matured in this crypt. For the casual visitor, the entire crypt might appear to be more like a large natural cave than a building constructed by the hand of man. But a person is no more than an instrument of the higher being. Here, every column has its own shape, the same way that every tree in nature is shaped differently. To make the stairs leading into the crypt, I was forced to go around a centenarian pine tree that I didn't want removed under any circumstance. A stairway can be made in a moment, but a tree needs longer to grow. Such was the natural impulse that guided me. The aspiration of art is to achieve the fullness of the proposed effect. You already know that all my life I was a man deeply attached to my homeland, to my origin, that I was intensely nationalistic, and I wanted to reflect that sentiment through my work. Possibly the best example of this was Bellesguard, the Bella Vista, built between 1900 and 1909. This house was commissioned to me by Doña Maria Sagues, the widow of Figueras and a great friend of mine who wanted to restore the historic value of this place. It was in this same spot that King Martin I, known as the Humane, the last king of Aragon of the Catalan dynasty, had ordered a country estate to be built in 1408. With him, a saga and Catalonia's greatest era had come to an end. Consequently, Bellesguard led me to recover Gothic elements that had been abandoned. More than a house, I conceived a vestige of my homeland's glorious past, a monument to Catalonia's flourishing time periods. Such was my interest in making this house a symbol that I preserved the remains of the old medieval construction, associating them to the building through a shared garden. The completion ceremony of the work was made to coincide with the 500th anniversary of the marriage between Martin the Humane and Margarita de Prades, which had taken place in this very same Bellesguard. I thought this was a good way to pay homage to our last great monarch. On his many trips to other countries, certain parks and gardens in England had captured the attention of Eusebi Güell. Maybe this is the true origin of Güell Park. This area of Montaña Pelada, or Bald Mountain, had originally been acquired with the purpose of building a housing development. A residential neighborhood consisting of 60 triangular plots distributed across the mountainside to ensure an optimum view of the city. All of the buildings were to be made in sunny areas, and a wall around the entire estate would protect it from undesired visitors. This plan failed, however. Only 2 plots were sold, and the city turned its back on the project. The land set aside for the houses remained unbuilt, but the leisure area and plaza that was to serve as a meeting place for the area's residents started to give shape to the park. I myself moved into one of the houses, taking with me my elderly father, who was 93 years old and found it difficult to climb stairs. This was to be my home for several years until I decided to move, for work reasons, into a studio located at the foot of the Holy Family Church. I have already explained to you my concept of integrating architecture into the landscape. In this park, all the decorative and structural elements were developed with that thought in mind. Colors, materials, almost magical effects. I firmly rejected the idea of leveling part of the hillside for a roadway, because I wanted to design viaducts and gorges similar to those we see in nature. When Dr. Torres Ibages came to see the construction work at Park Güell, he walked for a while with his head bent slightly forward because of his nearsightedness. Then he said, "Now I see. You have used the lay of the land to create the greatest level of comfort." This was a very exact comment, in keeping with the great bishop's precise usage of words. Although physically short-sighted, he had acute mental vision. The materials we used did not cost us much of anything, as we made use of all that we found on the original land site. The ceramic coverings were made with a mixture called trancadís, consisting of fragmented tiles and glass and shards of metal held together with mortar. For creating the mosaics, I relied on the help of my friend, the master Josep Maria Jujol. I have always understood and defended teamwork. Work is the result of collaboration, and this is only possible if it is based on love. Every work of art must be seductive. This is where its universality lies, drawing everyone to it, both the specialist and the layperson. When the quality of seduction is lost in the attempted originality, it is not a work of art. Beauty is the reflection of truth. Just as art is beauty, without truth there is no art. In order to find the truth, we must be well acquainted with the beings of the creation. Josep Batlló y Cánovas was a rich textile manufacturer who one fine day decided to completely renovate his conventional and boring house on Barcelona's Paseo de Gracia. Through a mutual friend, Pere Milà, he contacted me to carry out his dream. So, making use of some of the old structures, I let my fantasy run free and designed this visionary dwelling. The facade rests on powerful columns that are like an elephant's feet. While the irregular outline of the roof is reminiscent of an ancient dragon's backbone. To carry it out, I carefully heeded the animal world imagery that was going through my mind. The facade is alive with small curved balconies that seem to adhere to the wall like birds' nests against a rock. Angles and straight lines disappear altogether. Everything seems to be flowing. The wall, dotted with ceramic discs that glisten in the sunlight, undulates like the skin of a reptile. The facade is covered with polished stone from Montjuic, its sandy tone making the wall look like mottled clay. For me, this house was like a dream. A natural, flexible, undulating, and light dream. In 1906, and commissioned by the lady Rouzet Segimon de Milà, I began work on the project of this house located at the corner of Paseo de Gracia with Provenza Street. It was a plot of land of more than 1,000 square meters, and its chamfered corner was a challenge for me, leading me in a different direction from the types of structures I had used previously. Even though the building would be located between other buildings on both streets, I wanted to give it the appearance of a detached house. So I deviated the corner, making it twist, suggesting a type of a rotunda. Then I planned the large interior patios as if they were huge towers, substituting the classical geometric shape of this type of patio for rounded shapes that opened out as the height increased. I conceived the work as a monument to Our Lady of the Rosary, since there were few monuments in Barcelona. And since the cost would be extraordinary, I resolved to be sparing with the construction. Casa Milà was built on a shoestring. I thought that the patina on the stonework of the facade would be enhanced with the climbing plants and the flowers from the balconies, which would give the building constantly changing colors. I wanted to show off the shapes with simplicity. Shapes expressed with simplicity have even more grandeur. The great book, always open, that we should force ourselves to read is nature. My relationship with faith, my beliefs, had been deepening over the last few years, and I was more and more integrating religious elements in my constructions. For Casa Milà, I had thought of decorating the facade with a series of dedicatories to the Virgin, to Michael, and to Gabriel, the two archangels. But the client wasn't convinced with the different models. So little by little, I lost interest in the work and left the finishing details to be completed. This was 1911. People at the time didn't fully understand the undulating and porous proposal of that facade and nicknamed the building La Pedrera, or the Stone Quarry, making it the brunt of jokes and satire. But I wanted this house, which was to be my last civil work, to be a creative and practical summary of all the shapes for which I had become famous until that moment. For any artist, a project like the Sagrada Familia would have been the culmination of a lifetime. Nevertheless, I couldn't think about anything like that when, at the age of 31, I decided to accept the direction of the construction of this temple. In 1866, Josep Bocabella y Verdaguer had founded the Congregation of Devotees of St. Joseph. And a few years later, in 1877, the architect of the diocese, Francisco de Paula y Villar, offered his services freely for designing the plans of the cathedral. On the 19th of March, 1882, the first stone was placed, according to Villar's plan. However, the following year, after the architect had resigned, I agreed to continue with the construction. But I never imagined that I would not see this project completed. Given that it was an expiatory temple, which meant that it would be built mainly from donations received, added to the fact that my way of building was highly personal, contributed to a great extent to the slow progress of the work. I developed my creations as the construction progressed, incorporating new elements as the work went along. In spite of my skepticism towards the church at that time, I decided to accept the direction of the project because, in reality, this was my first major project. In carrying it out, I carefully considered the religious functions of the temple and studied in depth not only religious architecture, but also the liturgy of the Mass itself. Everything having to do with the Sagrada Familia was providential. The site was in the center of the city, and in the center of the plain of Barcelona. There was the same distance from the temple to the sea as there was from the temple to the mountain, to Sants and to San Andreu, and at the same time it was equidistant to the Besós and Llobregat rivers. In the Holy Family Church, the architectural elements fulfill a symbolical function that, for me, came to be very important. Thus, the towers needed to be an allusion to the 12 apostles, to the 4 evangelists, to the Virgin Mary, and to Jesus Christ, and with them, to the history of Christianity. I saw the bishops as the heirs of the apostles, which is why some of the towers are capped with episcopal symbols: the crozier and the ring. The incorporation of biblical scenes was also of transcendental importance, although nothing new in the history of cathedrals. But my project did not seek to simply be a church, a place of meeting in which to honor God. Rather, it sought to be a kind of catechism in stone, a gigantic book setting forth the places and stories of Christianity. The birds symbolize the higher states of being, the bird soul that rises and the messenger birds that descend like bearers of celestial powers. The cypress tree is the symbol of eternity, and it is flanked by 2 stairways of 7 steps each, and inhabited by white alabaster pigeons, which are the purified and predestined souls. An absurd tram got in the way of my dreams and me on the 7th of June, 1926. As a result, I lost my life 3 days later at the Holy Cross Hospital in Barcelona. I was just about to turn 75. The Temple of the Sagrada Familia was to have been the first of a series of new cathedrals.